Welcome to the auditorium, Dr. Hashim Jalal. My name is Najla and I will be the master of ceremony for today's public discussion. Welcome to a public discussion with Ambassador Robert Blake titled Figuring Out President Trump 2.0’s International Playbook, What to Expect. As the 2024 US presidential election unfolds, a second Trump presidency raises concerns about America's role in global affairs. In his first 100 days, he made controversial moves including withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement and WHO, cutting US aid, and escalating trade tensions with various countries. So, how would Trump 2.0 reshape US foreign policy? First of all, I would like to welcome Ambassador Robert Blake, a senior managing director at McLarty Associates and the ambassador of the US to Indonesia in 2014 and 2016. And our moderator for today, the ambassador of Indonesia to Japan in 1998 to 2002, and to the US in 2002 and 2006. Ladies and gentlemen, let us extend our warm greetings to Ambassador Bob Blake and Ambassador Sumadi. We will kindly wait for Ambassador Blake first, so we will wait for him. Okay, welcome, Ambassador Blake. Okay. Yeah. I am pleased to welcome all participants joining us today, both in person and also online through our YouTube Live. Welcome, colleagues and friends. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we move on to the next agenda of the event, I invite all participants and distinguished guests to watch a brief FPCI video profile. Please enjoy.
Terpana dan terdiam, ku melihat sadarku bertahun bersama terwujudlah terbayang yang terindah, yang terhampa, berlalulah sadarku semuanya, perasaan, rasa cinta, kaulah yang diinginkan aku dari mimpiku, coba terbangkan hayalku dari sadarku. Terbayang yang terindah, yang terhampa, berlalulah sadarku semuanya, perasaan, rasa cinta, kaulah yang diinginkan aku dari mimpiku, oh. Coba terbangkan hayalku dari sadarku.
That was our video on FPCI. Before we begin the discussion, I would like to invite Ambassador Blake to give an opening remarks. Ambassador Blake, please come up to the stage. Everyone, give applause to Ambassador Blake. Ambassadors, you have 15 minutes.
All right, well, nice to see everybody. I'm so glad to be back here at the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. This is my second time in 2 days that I've been here in FPCI. I was here on Tuesday for a launch of the Tools for Humanity that the FPCI hosted, which was a wonderful event. And as many of you know, I was ambassador here about 10 years ago and spoke many times at FPCI. I enjoyed that video. I'm particularly happy to see that my friend Dino Jalal did not put the video up of me dancing, because he has that he likes to embarrass me with from time to time, but today they kept it out. I was asked to talk today about the early actions of the Trump administration and what they mean for Indonesia and what they mean for the world. So let me try to briefly summarize some of his most important domestic and foreign policy actions, a little bit the strategy and thinking behind them, and then some of the challenges that they have received in the United States from the courts and other things. And then finally, what are the implications for Indonesia, and what are some of the actions that Indonesia might consider taking? So let me just jump right in. As all of you know, Trump has had a very active 3 weeks since he took office on January 20th. And I think it's clear that his team was much better prepared this time to take very quick and early actions. And indeed, they've rolled out an amazingly wide range of executive and other orders in their short time in office. And indeed, the strategy was to what they call flood the zone, which is an American football term, which is basically to do as much as possible, as fast as possible, so that you put all of your opponents off guard and they don't know where to act first. And I think he's been quite successful in doing that. He also recognizes, I think, that his administration only has 2 years really to do this, because the midterm elections will be coming 2 years from now in November. And it's possible that he might lose control of either the House of Representatives or the Senate, because right now he has very thin margins. So it's important for them to get early actions and early successes. It would take me hours to summarize everything that the Trump administration is doing, and I won't try to do that. But generally speaking, his actions fall into two broad baskets. One are various domestic and foreign policy actions, and then the second are the various measures that he has taken to try to increase his own presidential power and weaken our system of checks and balances in the United States. So in the first category, let me just mention a few. He has sought to freeze all federal spending. That actually was quickly withdrawn because it was challenged in the courts. He has frozen all foreign aid for 90 days. I'm sure you've all been reading about that. And he also has sought to dramatically cut the number of staff of the U.S. Agency for International Development. That too has been frozen by a judge, at least temporarily. But that's just the beginning in terms of what they want to do with all the federal bureaucracy. They're targeting the Department of Education, agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, many, many other agencies. So they're really just beginning here. And then, as I mentioned, he's taking several actions to try to consolidate his own presidential power and to weaken our constitutional system of checks and balances. So, for example, he has fired the inspectors general of many of the most important federal agencies in the US government. And they are the watchdogs who try to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse in America. So they play a very, very important role. He's fired all of the Department of Justice attorneys who were in any way involved with prosecutions against him before he became president. And as you know, there were some very significant cases involving the January 6th riot to incite people to go up and demonstrate in the Capitol, but also there were cases involving his alleged mishandling of classified documents. They're quite serious cases. So all of those attorneys have been fired. He's also placed 60 senior leaders of the U.S. Agency for International Development on leave, allegedly because they were trying to circumvent his orders. So I think a few things are clear after these first 3 weeks on the job. One, he's pushing every boundary that he can to try to get his agenda through. Two, he doesn't really have very much concern about the law. And in fact, he's intentionally pushing legal boundaries as much as possible to see just exactly where those boundaries are. And then three, I think what's important for all of you to understand is that even though a lot of the actions that he's taking are infringing on the rights of Congress to, for example, appropriate all kinds of federal funding, so far he hasn't gotten any pushback from Republican senators or Republican members of the House of Representatives. And that's partly because they support what he's doing, many of them, but it's also because many of them are intimidated and they don't want to challenge the president. So far, so good for him on that front. Third, it is important to note that the courts have been quite active already. I mean, already he's had to backtrack on some of his most high-profile initiatives. So, for example, as I mentioned, he had to withdraw the freeze on all federal funding. He had to backtrack a little bit on the freeze on all aid. So now humanitarian aid is going to be allowed to go through, which is very, very important, particularly in places like Gaza, as you all know. A federal judge has stopped Elon Musk's efforts to fire a large portion of the AID workforce. And another federal judge has barred the US Department of the Treasury from handling data over to Elon Musk and his team regarding all of our payment systems. Very, very sensitive issue. And so a judge has stopped that. So let me talk a little bit about foreign policy, because I'm sure that's what you all are most interested in, and sort of what Trump's actions mean for the United States and what do they mean for the world. And I'll come to Indonesia after that. Again, he's taken a lot of quite high-profile steps. I'm sure you've read about a lot of them. Right out of the box, he threatened Mexico and Canada, our two closest neighbors, with high tariffs if they didn't do more to stop the flow of fentanyl across their borders into the United States. Fentanyl is an opioid that has killed a very large number of Americans. He has imposed an additional 10% tariff on China for the same reason, for not doing enough on the fentanyl front. China, unlike the other two, did immediately respond with retaliatory tariffs of their own. And he surprised the world, and I'm sure many people in Indonesia as well, by announcing that Israel would turn over control of the Gaza Strip to the United States, and then at the conclusion of fighting, and then all Gazans would be resettled to foreign countries. Now, of course, everybody in the Arab world has said they don't want to have Palestinians resettled. They want there to be a Palestinian homeland in Gaza and the West Bank. So that is still quite an important point of contention, and we can talk about that later. He's announced that he wants to buy Greenland, and he's announced that he wants to take back the Panama Canal. Both countries have rejected those proposals so far. And of course, he's withdrawn the United States, both from the Paris climate process, but also from the World Health Organization. And again, we can come back to that. And those are just a short sample of some of the things that he's been doing. So what do all these things say about how he's thinking about foreign policy and how he should manage foreign policy? First, I think President Trump seems to believe that the best way for him to achieve his objectives is through coercion and not through persuasion and diplomacy, which is the traditional way that we have always worked. And that he also, in terms of coercion, he wants to use primarily economic tools, mostly tariffs, to try to compel countries to do what he wants. He does not really intend to use military force. Second, I think what is different this time around is that he is taking a lot of actions not only against our adversaries, but also against some of our closest friends, like China, like Canada, obviously a NATO ally, also now taking steps against the European Union. So that's a little bit different. Third, there doesn't seem to be very much process involved in terms of consulting his advisors, consulting potentially the states that are affected by these things. Instead, he's just taking action and moving ahead. And so that, for that reason, there's sometimes some mistakes. More broadly, I think many Americans worry that his early actions are damaging America's standing in the world. And let me just give you a little bit more detail on that. As an American diplomat for 31 years, I learned that trust, reliability, and predictability are really the bedrock of strong bilateral and multilateral relations. And indeed, our system of alliances that we have around the world is our key strategic advantage that we enjoy over countries like China. And Trump, through his actions, is eroding trust with the friends of ours in those alliances. And it's just going to make it harder, I think, for him to achieve a lot of what he wants to do. Second, gutting the foreign aid program, which is the world's largest foreign aid program, is not only going to have very serious humanitarian consequences in places like Indonesia and Gaza and elsewhere, but also it's going to dramatically reduce our soft power, our ability to influence other countries. And last, it's obviously going to provide an opportunity for China to step into that void and perhaps provide some of the aid that we are no longer going to be providing. Third, threatening countries like Colombia and a lot of the Central American countries with higher tariffs if they don't agree to allow the Trump administration to deport illegal immigrants from their countries back to their countries is already having an adverse impact on our relations with those countries. And I'll just give you one example. They don't want to be more vulnerable to tariff threats and other things. So what are they doing? They're very, very busy expanding trade relations with countries other than the United States. So the Mercosur nations, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, just signed a new trade agreement with the European Union to reduce their dependence on the United States and increase trade with the European Union. China has been doing the same thing for quite a long time. Already, China's percentage of trade with the United States is much smaller today than it used to be 4 or 5 years ago. And again, it's just to reduce their dependence and their vulnerability. Fourth, again, by imposing tariffs and threatening our closest friends and allies, it just makes it much harder for us to get things done. As an American diplomat, when we were trying to get things done around the world, the first thing we would ask is, okay, what kind of coalition can we put together of people who share our interest in this particular issue, and then we can all work together to achieve that objective. And now if Americans try to work alone on all these issues, it's going to be much more difficult. Another concern is that if the United States ignores the sovereignty of countries like Panama, like Greenland, like Gaza itself, and begins to bend international law, that also gives perhaps an incentive for authoritarian governments and autocrats around the world to bend the law themselves. You know, if the United States can do it, why shouldn't we, is the argument. And so people are worried that, that's going to perhaps embolden President Putin in Ukraine, perhaps President Xi Jinping in Taiwan. It will embolden right-wing Israeli politicians who might say suddenly, well, maybe we should not just seize Gaza, maybe we should seize the West Bank as well. So there's a lot of those kind of concerns as well. And then I think perhaps the last point that I'd like to emphasize is the United States, really since World War II, has been the chief architect and proponent of what we call the rules-based international order. And we did that for the simple reason that as the largest country and the most powerful country in the world, we had a strong interest in making sure that everybody else and that we obeyed these rules-based international order. Now, the rules-based international order is beginning to break down, and that's not good for us, and it's not good for countries like Indonesia or anyone else. So I think we do worry a little bit about that as well. So how is this all playing in the United States? Because of course we're a democracy still, and so what the people of America think matters. And interestingly, the majority of the population in the United States supports what Trump is doing. Now, when you dig down a little bit deeper into the polls, the pollsters will say that they approve because they don't really have a good sense really of what's happening in Washington. Everything is happening so fast that people are confused. But they do see that Trump is taking action, he's being vigorous, and they do see that he's taking action on immigration, which is a very important issue. The other really important issue for them is the economy and inflation. And they're willing to give the administration a little more time on that. So on balance, they're giving him pretty good marks for now. We'll have to see how that, So I'll be watching three things in the next 3 to 6 months as we sort of assess how the administration is doing. One is, what are the impact of his policies on inflation? One of his most important campaign promises, and the reason he won the election, was to bring down inflation. So far, he has not had any success with that. In fact, the latest numbers yesterday that came out show that inflation has increased in the last month. And people, of course, are worried that tariffs and other things that he's doing are going to increase inflation even more. So that's going to be quite an important indicator. The second is that Elon Musk has said that he wants to try to cut $2 trillion in federal spending, and again, dramatically reduce the federal workforce. Now that's going to have quite an impact on communities all over the United States who receive federal funding, who are the beneficiaries of all kinds of federal programs. And many of those communities, of course, are strong red states, states that voted for Donald Trump. So if those supporters begin to see that suddenly the welfare and other systems that are supporting them are no longer functioning, there's going to be a little bit of a pushback from them. So that's going to be an important thing to watch. And the third and most important thing is as the various courts around America begin to challenge the steps that Donald Trump is taking, will the Trump administration actually obey the courts when they tell him to stop doing whatever they're doing? President Trump has said that they will, but already there's evidence that that's not entirely correct. There have been cases where they've selectively implemented what the courts have told them to do. So that's going to be another important thing to watch. So what does all this mean for Indonesia? First of all, I'll say that I think Trump has a generally positive impression of Indonesia. You recall that Pak Luhut in the last administration had several meetings with President Trump. So I think he has, a general knowledge about Indonesia, which is good. He also has property here, which is also important, let's be honest. But in the end now, what we've already learned after 3 weeks is not nice. What really matters is action, not nice words. The Japanese Prime Minister had a visit last week, and he made all kinds of flattering remarks to the president. 2 days later, the president announced widespread tariffs on aluminum and steel that affected Japan. So, nice words are really not enough anymore. So what are some of the steps that Indonesia could take to potentially preempt punitive action by the Trump administration against Indonesia? I've got a couple of suggestions. One is Trump is very focused on countries that have high trade surpluses with the United States. So I think that Indonesia would be very smart to take some steps now to make some high value purchases, just to kind of take a little bit of that pressure off and show that Indonesia is being responsive. So for example, they might buy more defense equipment, which you certainly need. You might buy more agricultural products, things like wheat and soy that are not grown in Indonesia, but that you certainly need. You might buy things like airplanes, again, very high value targets that could be quite visible to the Trump administration. So again, I think that would help to perhaps, and I know that President Prabowo has an austerity program, he's trying to cut costs, but again, a few of these high value purchases I think would help to preempt more damaging steps down the line. Secondly, I think that the trade ministry should think about selectively cutting some of your tariffs on American products. I'm sure you've seen that Prime Minister Modi is going to be visiting Trump, I think today, in fact. And the Indians have been very clever about thinking about this. And they said, okay, what are the things that Trump really cares about? What are the American exports? One of them is Harley Davidsons. He was very focused on this in the first administration in India. And so the Indians, in advance of this visit, just unilaterally cut tariffs on Harley Davidsons by half, which will make it easier, of course, to export more Harley Davidsons to India. So that's, I think, kind of the sort of smart strategic move that other countries should be thinking about. And so if they could. Third, as prospects for a US-China trade war increase, there's both risks and opportunities for Indonesia. The risk, of course, is that as China is no longer able to export to the United States, they'll try to dump more of their products in Indonesia. So you need to be prepared for that and maybe set up your own little tariff barriers to protect yourselves. But I think on the opportunity side, there's a chance for you to perhaps benefit from the realignment of supply chains. A lot of American companies are very worried about operating now in China, not just because of the US-China trade war, but it's just more difficult now for the private sector to be operating in China. Growth rates are lower, so the rewards are less. So they're looking to improve the resilience of their supply chains. And so they're looking around, where else can they move? So many are moving to Vietnam, some are moving to India, but I think Indonesia also has an opportunity. And I'm just happy to see that Minister Rosan Roslani is again thinking about what are the steps that Indonesia can take to improve the investment climate, make it easier and faster for investors to invest here. And then last, I think Indonesia would be smart to appoint an ambassador. You haven't had an ambassador for quite a long time in Washington, and it's a very, very important time to have somebody who's close to President Prabowo, who can give him advice, and very importantly, arrange a visit for President Prabowo to come and meet with Trump, because personal engagement like this is going to be very, very important. I got just a few more things I want to say. Climate. You all know that I spent 2 years ago, I worked with John Kerry on the famous Just Energy Transition Partnership. Obviously, Trump has withdrawn the United States from the Paris climate process, and he's also withdrawn us from the Just Energy Transition Partnership process as well. So Germany has taken over from the United States as the co-lead on that, which is great. I'm very, very happy to see that. So I hope that the JET-P efforts will continue and that Indonesia will be an enthusiastic participant in that. But I think the other opportunity is that all of the countries of the world are looking ahead to Brazil, to the next COP that's going to take place in Brazil in November. And this year, every single country in the world is supposed to put out new, what they call nationally determined contributions, new climate targets. And some countries are saying, oh, you know, now the United States is no longer in it, maybe we shouldn't do this. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think there's actually a huge opportunity now. And even though Trump has withdrawn us at the federal level, at the subnational level, we're still very much in. So states and cities who represent 2/3 of America's GDP are still in and part of the climate process. So there's only a limit of what Trump can actually do about that. So I think our climate engagement will continue no matter what Trump says. But likewise, this is a huge opportunity for Indonesia because obviously renewables are much cheaper now, in most cases cheaper than coal. So there's a great opportunity to develop wind and solar, develop your own manufacturing capability in those areas, and then rapidly deploy those all over Indonesia in a way that's going to bring down costs for your consumers, but also increase opportunities for your companies. So I really hope that will happen. The third opportunity, I think, is on critical minerals. Everybody knows that Trump wants to reduce America's reliance on China and China's control of critical minerals. Indonesia, of course, has very important supplies of nickel and other critical minerals. So I think that there's a good opportunity to sign a critical minerals agreement, a bilateral agreement, that would basically be like a small free trade agreement on critical minerals. And that, to me, would be a very good, positive step in our bilateral relations. So I've already gotten the message that my time is up, so I will stop here, and we'll start our conversation with my friend Samoja, who's my good friend. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ambassador Blake. You may take a seat on the right sofa. You may take a seat. Okay.
Over here?
Okay. Without further ado, I invite Ambassador Sumadi to the stage and to lead the discussion.
Oh, okay. They want me over there for some reason. Do you want this microphone?
Well,
Ambassador Sumadi, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. And I think you have already speak a lot, and your advice is very concrete. And if there are businessmen around here, they certainly it will benefit them very much. No, but let me continue our conversation with. I know you well, so apart from ambassador, you are also a U.S. citizen. So let me first talk you as citizen Robert Blake. 4 years ago, we all around the world actually watch very closely from television or directly from my room. In the aftermath and the wake of this 2020 election, sometimes which is rather worrying for a democratizing country, which look up to the U.S. example. And what we see was a rather worrying undemocratic act that are happening there. We even see how undemocratic violence could enter into the shrine of democracy in the U.S., which is Capitol Hill. So the question now is to citizen Blake. After this, and of course, let me say that at that time, people talking about the most possible involvement of the failing candidate at that time, the failure of Trump. So with all this memory, which is still only 4 years ago, how could now President Trump can be successful in getting elected?
That's a great question, and that's a question a lot of Americans are asking themselves. I think the short answer is that for all of the progress that we have seen in the United States, the huge technology process, the progress of our digital economy and our tech sector, and so many other things, America has become a much more unequal society. And so the benefits of all that progress have gone to a very small number of people, relatively speaking, a relatively small percentage of the economy, whereas most of Americans have been left behind, or at least they feel like they've been left behind. And there were a lot of polls that were done in the course of the election that showed that a majority of the people could not afford to pay, let's say, a $500 medical bill. They did not have the money, the disposable income to pay. So they were really living on the margins. And they were worried about their economic future and the future of their families. And they felt like the Biden administration was doing a lot at the sort of macro level, but didn't have sufficient concerns about ordinary people. And in my mind, the key mistake that Kamala Harris made, I think she ran quite a good campaign, but the real turning point, if you talk to Republican pollsters about what was the turning point in the campaign, it was when she was asked a question on a television program called The View, and it was supposed to be a softball question, and the softball question was, what would you do differently than President Biden? And that should have been an opportunity for her to say, well, we're very concerned about the lower working class. We want to do everything we can to raise their prospects, reduce inflation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Instead, she just said, she thought about it for a second, and she wanted to be loyal to Biden, and she said, nothing. Well, I support what the president has done, which is, of course, what a vice president should say. But at that point, she was a candidate. She was not a vice president. And the Trump administration used that to basically say, in their advertising, it just shows it's going to be more of the same. It's going to be Biden all over again. And so I think that was really the key.
Okay. Thank you very much. This clarifies somehow, the phenomenon that we are witnessing now.
Yes.
I think everybody will just think about this later on. Now, my second question is addressed to a very seasoned, experienced ambassador, His Excellency Robert O. Blake Jr.
Oh my God.
When I was there, and of course your experience also, in negotiating documents, whether it is an agreement or a joint statement, we always put in that document a reminder of what we call shared values. There are a lot of shared values, but 3 shared values that almost always in such a document are: first, rule-based. And of course, rule-based in the international governance, meaning strong multilateralism. You have already explained it a little bit earlier about this rule-based. But if you can add a little bit, it would be appreciated. The second, what is shared value if we don't negotiate with the Americans, always open economy and free trade. The open economy and free trade, the core meaning, the name of the game, is to reduce or to eliminate tariff. Now what the American doing is imposing new tariff. So where is this shared value anymore? And the third is, of course, human right and fundamental freedom. We always put it there. And what we now see, the American position in Gaza is certainly contrary to the shared value that we always cherish. Now, my question, if you are reincarnated as a diplomat again, what you will explain to your counterpart in negotiating such kind of shared value, please?
So that's a rather complicated, long question. I'll try not to take too long to answer it. But maybe just to go back to how Trump thinks about the world. He came in with the view that American foreign policy has not delivered for the American people, and particularly for his constituency, the sort of working class and so forth. And so whether it's on trade matters where they feel that Open trade has basically allowed China and other countries to steal jobs away. A lot of the automobile industry, for example, has now moved to Mexico, part of it to Canada, part of it to elsewhere. But there are many, many other examples of that. So his sort of worldview is the way to fix that is to impose high tariffs on all of those countries and particularly on those products so that there can be more jobs that come back onshore to encourage manufacturing. What it ignores is that really those jobs were not lost because of trade issues. Mostly they were lost because of automation. All of these industries became much more efficient and used automation. And so studies have shown that most of the job losses that occurred were because of automation, not because of trade. But Trump ignores that. And so he's very, very focused on tariffs and as a way forward. And as I say, tariffs are a rather imperfect way of trying to address these kinds of things for two reasons. One, they raise the costs for American consumers because the tariff is like a tax. And so the cost is going to go up. So inflation is going to be something to watch. But secondly, people don't just sit and say, okay, fine. They retaliate. So the Chinese have already retaliated. The European Union is going to retaliate. Trump is now talking about a reciprocal tax on every single tariff in the that comes into the United States, which would be a huge undertaking. But most of those countries also will retaliate. And when they retaliate, of course, that raises again the costs to our American consumers. So there are significant costs to the types of things that he's talking about. On the sort of rules-based order, again, he prides himself on being a disruptor. He doesn't really care so much about these high-minded concepts of the rules-based order and things like that. He wants to get things done for the American people and doesn't so much worry about these other things. So, in my personal view, that's a mistake. I think that we benefit, as I say, from the maintenance and strengthening of the rules-based order. We want to work with countries that have good governance, that have strong economic opportunities for their people, that have reduced various kinds of regulations to create opportunities, and that's what we've always promoted around the world. And now we're in a new world. So we'll have to see. I mean, he's proposing a very, very different form of foreign policy, and I think there are going to be some constraints on the success of that, as I've mentioned, but he should be given a chance, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you very much. Now I will be a little bit more focused. You have very experienced as ambassador in Indonesia.
Yes.
And you have already advised us how Indonesia might wish to better respond to what now President Trump is. But there are still some, you have already mentioned about our response in the economic relations and trade relations. But our relationship is not only on economic and trade. Of course. And there are actually priorities that we still have. Which one is ASEAN? ASEAN is still the cornerstone of the Indonesian foreign policy. And if we look back to the experience that we have with Trump 1.0, the attention of President Trump to ASEAN is minimal. From 4 ASEAN summits with ASEAN partners, President Trump only attended once. And then other initiative of ASEAN has never get attention, proper attention from him, actually. So is there any new hope in the US-ASEAN relationship in this ASEAN, in this Trump 2.0? The second priority for Indonesia is, of course, APEC and then Asia Pacific and then now Indo-Pacific. As we observe in this, how many days you had the thing? Yeah. Yes. We already have a worry that his attention to the what we consider as a geopolitically important area of Indo-Pacific is also not so much. And this stems from the fact that during Trump 1-0, it is him who withdraw from the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership at that time. And now, the only activity that we have, and this is not only by him initiative, is the IPEF. Now, the question is, how could we, what kind of hope we can still entertain in cooperating with the US in terms of the overall relationship in the Indo-Pacific area, not only on trade, but also in security and stability, and so please.
So let me answer that in several ways. First of all, I don't think that Trump is going to be any different in this administration in terms of his attention to ASEAN. His attention is obviously focused on the big issues of the day, what's going on in Gaza, what relations with Iran, relations, what's going to happen with Ukraine, can he get a peace deal through on Ukraine, trade relations with the European Union. I think those are going to be the big kind of animating focuses of his foreign policy. And of course, China. I mean, China is number one of all those things. So I don't think ASEAN is going to get that much attention from President Trump. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, frankly, it's might be good to be a little bit off of his radar, and then allow the career diplomats and the career people to manage relations, because I think they all understand, we all understand as a former diplomat, the immense potential of not only Indonesia, but ASEAN more broadly. ASEAN as a region is going to grow exponentially in importance as demographic and other factors in other parts of the world weaken those economies. So by 2050, ASEAN is going to be one of our most important trading partners in the world, along with China and India. Probably those three are going to drive, and maybe India more even than China. We'll have to see. We'll have to watch about that. But so I think we all understand very well that it is absolutely essential for us to engage ASEAN, and particularly the most important country in ASEAN, Indonesia. So I think you should be reassured about that the smart people in Washington who will try to sort of drive policy on this realize that. And I, as I said, I think there's a lot of areas where we can cooperate together. The other area is defense, of course. You know, Indonesia, like a lot of countries, has to worry about what's going on in the South China Sea and elsewhere. And so there is an opportunity for them to work together. President Prabowo, of course, has been a strong supporter of our defense relations. So on the whole, I'm actually reasonably optimistic about Indonesia, and frankly kind of hope it'll stay below the radar, because that might be a good thing. On IPEF, I don't have great hopes for IPEF. That was a Biden administration initiative. And frankly, the only reason that most of the countries in IPEF were involved in IPEF was because they hoped that in a next Biden administration that we might begin to talk about market access for their products in the United States. Trump is not going to provide that. He's doing the opposite. He's imposing tariffs and things like that. So I think IPEF is not going to continue in any serious way. I'm sorry to say that, and there really won't. I don't think there really will be much of a bilateral or multilateral trade process. He's certainly not going to rejoin TPP or anything like that. So it's going to be very much a much more transactional foreign policy and trade policy, as we've already seen.
Okay, now my last question is addressed to a friend of Indonesia, Pak Blake, whatever. You know, President Trump has just suspended the USAID question. Some quite sizable of U.S. assistance to Indonesia through AID project, which could consider as people to strengthening people-to-people contact. And now you are also a co-chair of the U.S. Indonesia.
Society.
Yes, that is precisely there to strengthen the people-to-people relationship between our two countries. Now, with the suspension of this, what do you have a plan in this U.S. USINDO a new initiative, whatever, to at least maintain, if not even strengthen, our relationship at the people level, please?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to reassure people, I don't think that USAID is going to go away. That's what Trump would like to see, but I don't think that's going to happen. USAID has quite a lot of supporters on the Hill, on the Republican side, in addition to the Democrats. And already we've been seeing influential members of the Republican caucus, both on the Senate side and on the House side, speak up for AID and say what an important pillar of American foreign policy it is, and what an important piece of soft power it is for our country, and how it is such an important tool for us to make friends with countries around the world and help them to, with their, raise health standards, education standards, and so many other things. So I actually hope that after this 90-day review, that Marco Rubio and his team are going to find that most of what AID does makes very good strategic sense for the United States. Now, there are going to be little things that they're going to probably quibble with. They're going to stop climate financing. They're going to stop, things like transgender assistance. That's got to be a microscopic piece of AID, but they focus on these cultural war things. But I think on the whole, for example, most of the majority of our aid here is for health. We have a huge health program here, and it has made a huge difference here in Indonesia, and I think that will continue. There's no controversy about that. And likewise, many of the other things are programs to help American business. How do we help Indonesia to improve its investment standards? How do we help Indonesia to make it more open society? All those things benefit American companies. So there's a lot of things that we do. And then the other thing that I think people, and many of you might have seen, I put out a LinkedIn post about this, which is that there's the immediate benefits of what USAID does: health, education, governance, all those things. But the other kind of larger benefit that people sometimes lose sight of is that by helping to raise living standards and reduce poverty and provide economic opportunity in societies like Indonesia, we are denying groups like ISIS the opportunity to try to organize. They thrive on poverty and chaos and bad governance and corruption. That's how they organize. So that's why they've had a hard time here in Indonesia. ISIS is basically not a factor anymore here, because you've made so much progress on so many different issues. You have a thriving democracy. You have political parties like PKB and others who very well articulate the needs of the Muslim population. You have civil societies like NU and Muhammadiyah that are very, very involved. And so it's difficult for ISIS to organize here. So I think it's important for people in America to understand that these aid programs have intrinsic value for things like health, but they also help to prevent the spread of extremism and terrorism around the world. And so that's a point I think is important to reinforce, because it just gets lost in the debate in America. As to your question about USINDO, our strength is that we help two things. We help, as Samaj said, we help to develop people-to-people relations. But the most important thing that we do, in my view, is to help with educational ties, promoting more American universities to come here, like Georgetown, that has just recently set up a small campus and hopefully will expand, but also to help more Indonesian students to take advantage of programs like the LPDP program, to study in the United States, because every Indonesian that goes and studies in the United States comes back a friend of the United States and becomes an ambassador for us in their communities, in their businesses, and so forth. And likewise, every American that comes here and studies and spends time in Indonesia becomes a huge fan of Indonesia and becomes an ambassador in Indonesia back. So these people-to-people ties have lasting benefits, and these educational ties have lasting benefits. And particularly now, as Indonesia is moving into this new phase of competition with AI and the digital economy and robotics and quantum computing, you don't really have faculties yet that are teaching all those things. So it's important to develop those areas of cooperation, allow Indonesian students to study those things in the United States, and then hopefully maybe we can get American universities to start establishing campuses in those areas so that Indonesia can attract investment in semiconductors, so Indonesia can be a leader in AI, all those kind of things. So that's what we're trying to do at USINDO.
Thank you very much. So you have already speak very comprehensively. Lot of you are covering a lot of ground. We still have around.
I think that's his way of saying I talk too much.
No, but yeah. Yes, there are still 10 minutes left.
Oh my God!
So
we have to give these people a chance to ask questions.
that's why. That's what I. But I will start with an apology because I cannot give all the time to so many. So one from here. Oh, okay.
So
yes,
can I just ask? Keep your questions short, and I'll keep my answer. I'll keep my answer.
Each question and one question, no more.
Pak Bob, welcome back. Welcome back home, I would say. Agusari from Landscape Indonesia. You haven't spoken as much about Trump's sidekick, Elon Musk. And apparently he's also as detrimental in many ways, and probably even more so because he has not been duly appointed or confirmed by the Senate to sit on such a high and influential position. He's done a lot of things that apparently was unlawful and unconstitutional. That was somehow supported by President Trump. Diplomatically, that actually created a lot of distrust actually right now. The U.S. that used to be friendly and quite a secure partner has become a risky partner to have in so many businesses. I think what I'm wondering is, if Germany now, in Germany now, there are probably hundreds of thousands of people going to the street protesting the, far right-wing, emergence. I don't see that in the U.S. And as you said, probably because more than half of the people actually think that, this is cool. We have a very, very cool president. I don't know why. But that's probably what happened. You did mention about a number of lawsuits against the president and against his sidekick. But really, the world doesn't really see mobilization of we the people yet. I wonder why. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's a great question, Pagus. Sorry, let me do it one at a time because I'll forget otherwise. My brain's not big enough to remember. So the question was about Elon Musk's and his Department of Government Efficiency and all the things that he's doing, and why isn't there more pushback? And frankly, the Democrats are being criticized. They're saying, what are you doing here? You're all just sitting on your hands and not doing anything. And it's true. And in a way, it's Trump's strategy of flooding the zone, as I said, has worked because there's so many things that they don't know what to focus on. But I think that's beginning to change now. And again, you're seeing the courts are beginning to act in a serious way. You're seeing civil society, all various kinds of, are pushing back and filing their own lawsuits on issues of concern to them. But you know, this is going to take some time. This is all of this is going to play out over months or even years. So we'll just have to see what happens. But I just to maybe talk a little bit more about the Department of Government Efficiency, because I didn't really talk about it, as you say. For years and years and years, American politicians have run against Washington and against the federal government, and you know, and so the general population has a negative view of our bureaucracy. They think that we're all there. We have this we're this unelected bureaucracy that kind of does its own thing, and that we oppose the president, which is of course not true. We all are very careful to observe what the president does. But so what they're trying to do with the DOGE process is, first of all, to cut the federal government, but also to cut the oversight functions of the government. They don't want that. They want, you know, Elon Musk, Tesla, and all of his other businesses, they want less oversight from the government, less regulation. And they want a government, they think and they hope, will be more responsive to the directives of the president and not be in any way hostile to what he's doing. And it's true, sometimes the bureaucracy is hostile because we represent the people. You know, we're trying to sort of have a common sense view of what is in the interests. But you know, there's quite an ideological effort underway here, and it started at the State Department and AID, but they're going to continue. They're going to do the same pattern. Department of Education, they're even talking about the Department of Defense, you know, how there can be dramatic cuts there as well. So the overall objective is to reduce the federal bureaucracy, reduce oversight, reduce regulation, and make it easier for Elon Musk and others to do more. I think, you know, it's always good to have reviews like this, but I think they're going a little bit too far, and we're going to see that they're going to overstep their bounds, and they'll be pulled back in.
So, Ambassador Ivan,
Thank you, Ambassador Sumadi. Thank you, Ambassador Blake. It is very insightful presentation. I will be straightforward. Why does President Trump want to transform Gaza into U.S. territory? As I see it, it is not included in Madman theory, not at all. Because I read somewhere that Gaza has very potential in gas resources, huge deposit of gas resources. And the second, maybe by taking over Gaza, it will prevent the greater Israel to go. What do you think, Ambassador?
So a couple things. First of all, Trump has always, in the first term, pursued a much more pro-Israel foreign policy and a less balanced policy than we had under really bipartisan administrations before him. Republicans and Democrats before Trump traditionally supported a peace process that we hoped would lead to an independent Palestinian state. And we always believed that that was the way to finally achieve peace in the Middle East. Trump, as you know, did a lot of actions in the first term. He moved the capital to Jerusalem, which was very antithetic, as you know, broke a longstanding policy of America. He has, you know, recognized a lot more of the Israeli actions that they've taken on the West Bank and in Gaza and things like that. Now, I think he sort of pursues this whole Gaza situation from almost the idea of a property developer. You know, the whole place has been ruined. Why would any sane person want to go back there? And let's get them all out to a nicer place, and then maybe, you know, everything will be great. What he ignores, of course, is that the issue of land is the most important emotional issue for Palestinians ever. People were removed from their land in 1948, and they're still in Gaza, in refugee camps in Lebanon and the West Bank and elsewhere, you know, so many years later. So the issue of land is incredibly important for Palestinians. And every Arab leader understands that. They know that it's impossible to ask the Palestinians and the Gazans to leave Gaza. They all want to go back, even if it's ruined. They would like the help of Saudi Arabia and all the Gulf states to help rebuild Gaza, not to exit Gaza. And that the way forward is a long-term settlement that achieves an independent Palestinian state. Obviously, Prime Minister Netanyahu does not want that, and his right-wing supporters certainly do not want that. They see an opportunity to actually annex the West Bank and maybe do more and seize the West Bank. So there's a huge difference here at play. And so far, you saw the King of Jordan, President Sisi of Egypt has refused to come to Washington because he doesn't want to have to answer these questions. He supports the return of Gazans to Gaza. But again, I think the very, very important country to watch will be Saudi Arabia. Trump listens to Saudi Arabia. He has a lot of investments in Saudi Arabia. Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, works a lot with the Saudis. And one of the proudest achievements of the first Trump administration were the so-called Abraham Accords. And the prize of the Abraham Accords is a peace agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Saudi Arabia is very concerned about what is going on now. They do not support the eviction of Gazans from Gaza. They want to see them return. And so I think Saudi Arabia can play a very, very important, maybe even instrumental role in influencing Trump's thinking on this, because he does want to see peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And Saudi Arabia is not going to go for any of the things that he has proposed so far, because they understand that that would be highly destabilizing, not only for Gaza, but for the entire Middle East, because all of these countries, if they were to support what Trump is proposing, would be deeply destabilizing for their own people. And including here in Indonesia, I might add. People care a lot about what happens in Gaza. And to the extent there were ever demonstrations in front of our embassy, they were always about Gaza and about Palestinians and things like that. So, and that's good. I mean, people should speak their minds. And so, I don't think Trump quite understands what an important emotional issue this is, not only for Gazans and Palestinians, but for the wider Muslim world. So I think Saudi Arabia is going to help them to understand that, and hopefully force them to understand that.
Well, unfortunately, time is up. I think with the concise presentation and short question and answer that we had, all of us, of course, Ambassador Blake, we have already covered a lot of ground. For that, on behalf of the audience, both here and who did it online, thank you very much, and especially on behalf of the FECI, thank you very much for coming again. Don't wait until the new election to come again.
Thank you. Now, the big question is whether Trump will now allow me back into America after all that I've just said. But, so watch this space.
There will be a volunteer who will accompany you to America so that you'll be safe.
So you may need to create a room for me here at FPCI. So anyway, thank you all very much. It's great to talk to you. I always appreciate coming back here.
Thank you very much. I give the floor back to the MC, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Blake, for sharing your valuable insights, and thank you, Ambassador Sumadi, for moderating today's discussion. Before we end this discussion, I would like to invite Ambassador Blake and Ambassador Sumadi to take a quick picture together. You may stand up to take the picture.
Oh my God, stand up. Oh my God.
Okay. On my cue, with Pa Iwan. Okay, on my cue, 3, 2, 1. Once more, 3, 2, 1. Okay, maybe last one. 3, 2, 1. Okay, you may return to your seat.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you,
I will accompany you.
Good to meet you.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih semuanya.
hotel is going to throw me out of my room at 12 o'clock. So I have to go back and pack. So, or else they're going to confiscate everything. So anyway, have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.
And with that, today's discussion.